Let's talk about handling objections. Why do executives or customers object? What do you get challenged on? Price, on-time delivery, other priorities, hidden agendas, that's policy. Sometimes you'll get challenged on experiences, your resume, maybe because you're a female, they don't like you, they don't trust you, they don't have the budget, resource constraints, like all the things, right? What type of styles or situations drive you nuts? Silence, aggressive personalities, sidebars. Like, for example, if two dudes are talking while you're presenting and you don't know if they're talking about the golf game that they had over the weekend or if they're trying to actually action or shape your proposal. You also have things like disengaged, multitasking, arrogant, dismissive, egos, contrarians. People that just like to say no because they can say no and they're going to say no no matter what you say. You have things like multiple interactions, rifling questions at you. Maybe you just don't have the right decision makers in the room. So here's the deal. The first step in any presentation, any negotiation, any meeting is to distill your purpose and your WIFM, right? You have to know what you're negotiating for. If you don't get this right and you get the question, what do you want? And you cannot articulate with specifics, what's going to happen? They're going to say no because they don't know what you're asking for. They don't know what to give you, right? You have to write it on the back of your eyelids and be prepared for the buying signals. You have to be prepared for the pushback, all the things, manage all of the situation. Typically, the model is very straightforward. When you get a question or a reaction, you listen and you respond, and life is good. It's pretty straightforward. Conversely, if you get a question and you listen to the phrasing, the tone, the sarcasm, or just the overall complexity of it, and suddenly your bullshit radar goes on high alert saying this is not business as usual, something's wrong, like there's more to what's been said. So let's say they throw a single question at you. You respond and instantly they throw another. You're like, shit. Well, clearly I didn't get that quite right. Right? They're just rifling questions and you're not going to be a good soldier and just respond to them. It is time to negotiate. It's time to figure out what's behind it. So then you say to yourself, okay, maybe there's something behind this question and I need to understand. What did they really mean by that statement or that question? It's time to go fishing. You have to play stupid. I always think it's really annoying when people are like, you have to sell authentically. Like, no, you have to understand what drives business. You have to understand what it is that is going to get them to say yes. It's not about you, it's about them. So the model says, right, you acknowledge, clarify, respond, and check back. That's the macro, right? That's the big picture. Again, really simple. Most sales models all follow the same philosophy, but here it is in detail. So at the top, you listen. You should be able to listen, but what is it that you're listening for or to? A lot of times I'll get things like keywords, buzzwords, objections, objectives. So yes, we are listening for all the specific factual information that's coming your way, but there's so much more. If you remember back, I talked about messaging. There's several aspects that go into a message. So what else are you listening for? What does tone tell you? How important or unimportant is tone? The vocal variety, the inflection, right? Tone can give you a lot of clues. It is not an absolute, but it is an indicator. You should be on high alert when something doesn't sound quite right. Right? When there's a disconnect between what they have said and how they have said it, right? When there's a disconnect between the words and the tone, the words lose. But that's your signal to go fishing. What else am I listening for? Remember, there is another couple things. So we've got words, we've got tone, and then we've got nonverbals, right? We're listening to the body language. We're listening to how the information is packaged, right? What does it tell you if somebody is crossed off? Right? Aggressive, vaulting, pounding on the desk, right? What about subtle signatures and subtle changes, right? We don't know if somebody is cold or making a judgment, We need to go fishing. When something doesn't look right, we need to figure out what's behind it. So why do you do that? Because now it's not about what they've just said. It's also about what they are feeling and thinking, right? We have to get behind what is being said. So a lot of times we need to just literally play stupid, but we need to be cognizant of what we're listening for. There's more things to listen to. What else? We work in global environments, so we're listening for cultures. Why? Because we don't want to offend. Nonverbals have a tendency, depending on which country you're in, to offend. That's for a different episode, right? Different cultures approach communication differently. Besides that, essentially what we're listening to are the words, tone, nonverbals, and the intent. What they said, how it was packaged, what they meant by it, and then you acknowledge. What does it mean to acknowledge? So you get a question, or maybe so-and-so asks you a question and I say, oh, that's a good question. And then I get a question over here and I say, that's a good question. That's a good question. That's a good question. It's an acknowledgement, but what's the challenge with using that's a good question? Everybody says it. It's repetitive, which becomes insincere. It literally means nothing. The word good is average, and so are your executives going to ask average level questions? Probably not. So my challenge to you is that you need to become very conversant and develop a repertoire of sincere, accurate, and insightful acknowledgments. Because an acknowledgement does three things. It shows respect for the person, right? It shows respect for what they have said, no matter how they have said it. And it gives you an opportunity to position if you disagree. Because if you agree, then you have a right to align. However, if you disagree and you don't push back or position appropriately, what happens? You own it, right? It is your obligation to get an understanding of what they meant by it. For example, in negotiations, somebody will tell you, you're too expensive. We hear it all the time. And if you don't push back appropriately, what have you just agreed to? That you're expensive. It's a negotiations tactic. You own it. So you may experience somebody who just starts coming unglued, right? They just get angry. You say, okay, so-and-so, I understand where you're coming from. And I put my hands down like this. What do you think is going to happen? What if I just told her? I basically told her to shut up and sit down non-verbally. So the intent is I would like to understand, but if I exaggerate, overstate my position, I have not walked a mile in her shoes. I don't have a clue where she is coming from. If I overstate, I understand. I become arrogant and insincere. Ultimately, the acknowledgments are a key science and art that will level set a contentious environment to bring it back to a dialogue so we can start asking questions. Short version would be to say, okay, so-and-so, clearly you're very frustrated. I would like to understand where you're coming from. I'm acknowledging the packaging of how the message came to you. Or you can do it the long version and do all of it. Okay, so-and-so, that is a very challenging statement. I hadn't considered it, but I'm glad that you brought it up because it gets to the heart of the issue. I simply have a different perspective. So it is a longer acknowledgement, but my intent here is to show respect for the person, what they have said, and if I have a different point of view, I have to position to it. So then we have the next level of things. We have clarify and open explore questions. We're starting to funnel, right? There's a whole bunch of clarifying questions. It's not just about playing stupid and asking the questions. This is where you need to go fishing for information. We need to play stupid to confirm that we are responding to their specific concern, not giving them a general response. What happens when I ask an open question versus a closed question, right? We have to be prepared to listen because that person could give you a very specific answer, or they could give you a whole lot of information. And if they start talking about schedules, risk, supply chain, whatever, you listen, right? I'm going to suggest that you start getting very acquainted with equipment and things to capture notes because later on you're going to recap. Okay, let me make sure I have heard your concern on risk, schedule, HSC, cross-train service techs, and I may have missed that last one, right? I'm still searching for that, right? Why would I do that? Why am I recapping and listening? Because I don't want to leave this meeting with unresolved items. I don't want to have another meeting because I didn't do enough due diligence. But it's a talent to listen. When you've asked an open question, this is now your responsibility. It's the key to winning. So I've done that. And I say, okay, thank you very much for that clarity. I'm still confused here. Help me understand. It comes in onion layers. That is how you tease out the information. Then we have CSF questions, critical success factor questions. All the things that have to go right in order to achieve their corporate goals. So typically those goals are, and if we're talking oil and gas, production, financial, market share, HSE, local content, and we smart them, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic. So think things like first oil, incident rate, EBITDA, bookings, margin, right? When you ask a CSF question, say somebody resists you on your recommendation, what's the risk? Margin erosion. Say you have offered up a way forward to mitigate the schedule, and you get resistance, and I'm saying, okay, so-and-so, I'm confused. I'm going to acknowledge what has to go right then in order to capture that 3.4 million in that timeline. So now when I ask a CSF question, I'm not telling them how to solve it. I'm asking a CSF question to see two things. One, are they aligned with the vision and mission, right? Do they understand this 95% on-time delivery target? Do they understand that we have a responsibility to move EBITDA from 6% to 15%? And I'm listening, right? Do they understand the business? And two, can they problem solve? So if the resistor comes back and says, I don't give a shit, it ain't happening, I don't have the resources, and you get people who say things like, I'm just not going to do it, whatever the objection was. So if you ask two CSF questions and you get pushback twice, we have to escalate to pain. When we think about pain is where we dial into our silver bullets. I don't want you to use pain to punish, but it is about the consequences. We are using it to motivate. So, okay, so-and-so, if you don't like my recommendation and you're not interested in coming forth with alternatives, what are the consequences here? If you get a response to my first level of pain questions, generic pain, then I automatically go right back up to the acknowledgement and I say, okay, so-and-so, exactly. So having said that, is there any other reason why we can't move forward with my recommendations? And they say, I'm too busy. Well, then what happens? You have a second layer of pain questions. These are your siloed pain questions. These are tied to corporate goals, customer goals, your team metrics, your initiatives. Literally tie it right back to the strategic dashboard. Revenue, EBITDA, CAGR, on-time delivery, MPT, CapEx, OpEx, right? All the things. Optimized supply chain, all the initiatives, integrated system packages, all the things. Tie it back to their objectives. You have to make them acknowledge what's on the line if they don't get it right. And if they resist one more time, then what do? We have to make it personal. But you have to be prepared for the consequences if you go there. So what are the consequences to him professionally if he doesn't get this right? But I'd rather make it about us. What's at risk if we don't get it right? Now you can get creative and add the bonus CSF pain question where we're combining the things, meaning what has to go right in order to mitigate the consequences, right? We're tying it together. Ultimately, the focus is to find the pain and mitigate the pain. Then we're getting into the funnel, the back end of the funnel. Then we safety check. We ask the what else questions. Is there anything else? We recap and then we trial close. So just like I mentioned up top about the open explorer versus a clarifying question, what's the difference between a trial close versus a hard close? Just like an open question or a closed question. If you ask a hard close, are we good to go? And they have any reservations, what are they going to say? They're going to say no. So rather than asking a hard close, you're going to ask a trial close. You ask the question in the negative. It is designed to test their readiness to say yes. Is there any reason why we cannot move this process forward? In an ideal world, you fleshed it out. You asked all the questions, you trial close, and they say, oh, I'm good to go. Great. If they still have any reservations, they say, I'm not sure this will work. So then you go right back up to CSF trial close. What do you need to see from me in order to gain your agreement here? And close it out with a second trial close. Okay, so when I provide that to you and you recap with specifics, and it is to your satisfaction, is there then anything else that would prevent you from moving forward? So this model isn't linear. It is literally a flow chart that we maneuver. It's fluid. You got to go up, down, check your marks over here, check your wins over here, recap, flesh it out, because we don't want to have to come back to have a meeting, to have a meeting, to have a meeting. We want to position that value proposition to a win at the back end, and you shape it as you go along. We are listening for all of the things, words, tone, nonverbals, and what's behind the question. But we're also acknowledging all of the things that we're seeing. So the way I like to think of that acknowledgement is we are feeling something, sensing something, hearing something. We're going to acknowledge how the information is being presented or what it is that you're observing, and then position. And then we are funneling, right? So is it this or is it this? Open the kimono questions, the open explore, right? It's trying to help me understand, tell me more. And then we funnel it down. It comes in those onion layers. We recap. We take notes. We check back to make sure we have heard, right? And then we're funneling into those critical success factors. What has to go right? My understanding is you have X, Y, and Z targets. I need to be able to meet those metrics or support you in being able to meet and exceed those targets, right? Because what are the consequences if they don't go right? That's all of the things that we need to flesh out. So when you are dealing with a contrarian, somebody who likes to say no, it is all about getting an understanding of where the objection is coming from, right? We're not just answering the technical. It's not about being a good soldier. It is literally about being nimble and maneuvering around the conversation, and then ultimately building that trust through that conversation. So then we funnel it down. That trial close tests their readiness to say yes. So is there any reason that would prevent you from moving forward? All right. So for handling objections, this is about acknowledging why people object. Why do customers object? Why do executives object? What situations drive you nuts? What type of personalities drive you nuts, right? So think egos, hidden agendas, pricing objections, on-time delivery. If this episode gave you clarity, leave a review so we can keep spreading the pursuit of excellence. Make sure to subscribe and follow the Pursuit of Excellence pod on Instagram for all of the latest podcast news and updates. And you can follow me at Tinja Anderson on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for all finance, fitness, and food.